Hi, this is Lana Phelan, the polyamorous librarian, and this is my yearly wrap-up. Let's call it a holiday card. I know that I haven't been around much lately, basically the whole year, and I want to talk a little bit about why. I've said some things here and there, but I want to make it very clear. I want you to know that it's coming right for me. So I decided to make a video about it. And I'm going to be talking about some personal stuff. I'm going to be talking about some book stuff. I'm going to be talking about some projects that I did this year and some projects that I have coming up, which are not significantly different than the projects that I thought I was going to complete this year, and some of them the year before. It's been a pandemic, and it continues to be a pandemic. So I'm going to split this up a little bit. You're going to see some timestamps in the description. I will be talking about my health, which means that I will be talking about things like depression. I will be talking about some of my side effects, which include things like weight gain and nausea, and it's not pretty. So the timestamps are there so that if you would like to skip those parts, if you need to skip those parts, you'll know what's what. I'm going to be talking about the Hugo Awards, and my experiences being a Hugo voter, because it was really fun, and for people who like science fiction and fantasy, I'm going to be recommending to do it at least once because it's a fun experience. So I'm going to start with the personal stuff, and I'm going to start with the health stuff. I recently had an episode of vertigo, which was a full-on flippy, terrible vertigo, which is not usually how my life goes. I have persistent chronic dizziness, which is not quite the same thing, although it often feels very close to it. So what I experience regularly is a lot like, so if you close your eyes, perhaps you feel pretty still. I do not. I usually feel something like a rocking motion. It used to be kind of back and forth, and now it is consistently side to side. What happened when I had vertigo the other day was that it started to flip all the way, which is not what usually happens for me, and why it's been so difficult for us to come up with a diagnosis. What set all of this off 5 years ago in this upcoming February is that I did have vertigo and it did not resolve. So usually what happens if you have vertigo, it resolves within like a couple of days, and then you might still feel kind of crummy for a couple of weeks, maybe like 2 weeks. But after 2 weeks, I went back to work and it happened again. So my system just did not stop. And so they kept testing me to try to figure out why I didn't have like that resolution. And of course, the first thing they test you for is positional vertigo, which is the most common. It has to do with crystals in your ears and not being in the right place, and then it just sets off your whole vestibular system. Well, I kept getting tested for, it's like they have to, it's mandatory. They test you for vestibular, positional vertigo over and over and over again. They check your vestibular system. It is a very, turns out, well, originally it was a very boring test for me, but it's also kind of nauseating because I am dizzy all the time. They like have you sit, and then they put you back, and then you look off to the side, and then they check your eyes, and they're looking for a very particular response. And I never had that response before. It's a little difficult for me to talk about because the other day I went into physical therapy and I said, hey, I feel like I am completely untethered again. And my physical therapist, Joe, he's great. He knew exactly what I was talking about. And he said to me, we're going to have to. I said, I know. And he's like, and if we do that, we're not going to. I said, I know. And he's like, it's really great talking to you because I've been through this so much. And our conversation was to extrapolate, I have to do the diagnosis test on you for positional vertigo. Yes, I know. If we do that, I can't do anything, and it's positive, I have to do the Epley maneuver on you. I know. And if I do the Epley maneuver on you, we will not be having a regular physical therapy session tonight. I know. So for the first time in my life, I have a positive vertigo diagnosis on top of my regular diagnosis, which sucks. because all this time I've been coming up negative, right, for positional vertigo. Nobody ever told me that a positive test meant we're essentially going to trip vertigo in you and then watch your vestibular system and see how long it takes for it to do whatever. And it just makes me sick to talk about it. Like, I'm already, oof. It was awful, but I did feel relief like really quickly, like I'm supposed to. But again, I'm not resolving. So I'm still like I'm almost a week out, I'm 6 days out, and I'm still not, I feel no sense that I'm tethered. Several times a day, it'll start flipping again, but I am so used to that sensation of being almost flipped that I look like a totally normal person. I mean, I could be swaying. I'll only know when I watch the video back, but I'm so used to it now because it's been almost 5 years. And it really sucks because I was doing really well up till now. I don't know if, a lot of it is probably because I haven't been doing anything. I haven't been going out. I haven't been pushing myself. And honestly, I haven't been doing the stuff I'm supposed to be doing, which is like walking until you feel yucky and seeing how long it takes you to get back to normal again. Like, I haven't been doing any of that stuff because it's like, cold, or I don't feel like it, or it's a pandemic. I don't go out. So I felt like weak and I have a lot of pain in my shoulders and my neck, and hey, that's kind of part of what might be causing some of this problem. So I went to physical therapy, and now I'm back to where I was. So now we have to add that data in, and the physical therapist and I will add that data in, and then in a couple months, I have my follow-up with my neurologist. And then in early 2020, we started realizing that as the dizziness was getting easier for me to handle, we were noticing that a lot of the remainder of the symptoms were migraine based. Like, they were exactly lining up with migraines. So we've been treating this like they're vestibular migraines, which means a lot of throwing medications at them and seeing if it works. Injections and pills and so on and so forth. Well, one of the pills means that I don't really sleep anymore. So a lot of people have noticed that I am like up all the time. Like, someone will message me, like a friends will message me, and they'll be like, do you sleep? Because like, I messaged you before I went to bed. I messaged you, like, now that I'm up, you're up all the time. Yes, I am up all the time. And actually I do sleep quite a lot. I've made myself, but it takes melatonin, and a lot of times I'm on a 28-hour schedule. It's difficult, but I have decided that it basically is more important for me to get the sleep that I need and care for, like, when my body tells me to sleep too, rather than being exhausted just to be on the same schedule as everyone else. And that's one medication. And then they put me on another medication, which also works as an antidepressant. And for those of you who are on antidepressants, you know that there can be a lot of weight gain. It also gave me like reflux. Food tasted really bad when I hit the high level of what I was supposed to be taking it for. It was awful. Like, tomatoes tasted like burning, and applesauce tasted like tomatoes. So I just dropped that back to a lower level because it didn't seem to be doing anything for me except making food even more miserable. And since the first medication took away my appetite, should not have moved my head that much. Since the first medication took away my appetite, is a mess. I basically have gained so much weight so quickly, and yet it is incredibly difficult sometimes to force myself to eat a second meal of the day. I'm pretty good with the first one because by that point I haven't eaten in like 14, 15, 16, 17 hours, and I'm hungry-ish, so I can say, hey, breakfast, cool, no problem. But that second meal is like, gotta get there. So my metabolism's out of whack. My whole everything is just And it's been difficult because I've been doing this in a pretty solitary way. I don't have a like a pod or anything like that. I have my roommate who is wonderful, and my kid moved out. My kid had gone up to college in Connecticut and then came back before the pandemic, and then he quit his job because we both have a history of like not having the best lung health. And so when the pandemic came, we were like, oh, what are we gonna do? So he quit his job, and then he was like, okay, I would really like to go back to work and I would like to live, like on my own. And so he moved out recently, and is back to work because he likes it, he enjoys it. So that was to make sure that, like we would have as little contact because he works with the public. So it's just me and my roommate mostly. In 2020, I went into the pandemic with like 4 partners and 2 people that I was just starting to see. And by the middle of this year, I am dating nobody for like several different reasons. None of which is that anybody is like, not here to demonize anybody. A lot of it has to do with like what my needs were in the pandemic and how hard it is to be polyamorous and try to like not enforce a hierarchy in the midst of a thing where you want to like have less connections with people. And I live in a place where everybody's connected, just everybody. And I watched so many people struggle with how to be connected and how to like, how do we do this? How do we do this thing that we don't know how to do? 1, because it's a pandemic and we've never been through that in our lifetimes. And 2, we're polyamorous in a pandemic and we don't know how, we don't know how to do that. Like we have no idea how to or where to close our connections, right? So in my community, everything happened, like everything from, and when I say community, I mean the entirety of every person I know. I'm not talking about any particular relationships that were close to me or anything. I just mean like everything I heard about the entirety of like the tri-state area. I heard about everything from people, polycules just like closing down, like, hey, it's just going to be us number of people, like whether that's 2 or 3 or 5 or 7 or 15, like these are the only people that we're having contact with, all the way to, hey, I'm just going to lie about what I'm doing because it's fine. Or people in the middle who were kind of like, hey, I want to see who I want to see, but we don't know like all the science, so we're just going to do like, I'll see this person, wait 2 weeks or a week or whatever, and then test, and then see you. And it was just big and messy. And I didn't feel like there was really a place for me in that, in a way that made me feel like, I want to say safe and special at the same time. Like it was just, there was just too many moving parts with too many people, and it like all perfectly fine people. Just, I needed, like I had serious pandemic trauma. I was a mess. We had someone who moved in right before the pandemic who was looking for a temporary place to stay, and the first thing that person did was like break every single one of the house rules that they had just agreed to. And so like my household was dealing with that while like not disliking the person, which was a mess. We were trying to figure out like, okay, well, you said that this was going to be temporary. How can we help you with that situation? Because like this is not working out. it was just really difficult. And then feeling like outside of my own home, I had to balance everyone else's needs too. It just felt like so much. When things looked like maybe they were going to get a little bit more like out and open, people were starting to spend a little bit more time together. I just didn't see a place for myself there. Like I just didn't see it. I didn't feel like I looked at my community and I was just like, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do the you're connected to you, who's connected to this person, who's connected to that. I just don't want to do it anymore. I don't want to make the charts to figure out like who's with who and who's going to be, like in conflict and who's going to be the kitchen table poly people and who are going to be the parallel poly and who's going to be the birthday party poly. I was so already just, because what happened was I couldn't even read. Like I could barely read words on a screen. I could barely read news articles. I could like react to things right away. That was what was happening like in like around the middle of 2020. I could respond to things, but like I couldn't focus on words, and I didn't know how to break that. And as someone who's a reader who reads like hundreds of books a year, like 200 to 400 books a year, I was not okay with that. Like I had already lost my ability to like watch television like other people. Like I still haven't even seen a Spider-Man movie since the first Andrew Garfield, because I'm too sick to watch someone swing from place to place. Like you can see my hands move. I'm actually holding on to the desk sometimes when I talk about things like that. Like it's going to help. It doesn't. It makes me feel better. But, I've already lost so much in terms of media that I can take in as someone who is sick and dizzy all the time. I didn't want to lose books. And so I had this like really, really strong trauma response to that. And so I ended up going through finding out that if the words were spaced out far enough, if the words were like if I could just read a little bit at a time with the words spaced out enough. And I was like, graphic novels. So I ended up reading the entirety of Hellboy. And then, which is a lot if you've ever, is like Hellboy and like all these offshoots, and I can't say all the initials in the right order without saying the name of the organization, so I'm not even gonna try. And then I had to go from there to like favorite authors and do like a couple of rereads that were, things I loved to help me like get through that. And I even went into 2021, like there were books I could not finish. I couldn't even barely get into them because they were either too heavy or they had content that I couldn't engage with. And I'm still sometimes wondering, like I always had really strong opinions about books, and now I feel like I don't even know if books are good or bad, or if I just enjoyed them, which sounds very silly. But to me, as someone who spent a really long time in college and then afterwards and blogging about books, critiquing things, not knowing what my own opinion was a really big deal. So that was really difficult as well too. And one of my breakups was incredibly hard to say like, this isn't working, and it hasn't worked for a while, and emotionally I was a wreck. And on top of that, I said to some people, like, I really need to take some space from the social media, not just from this person, but like also the people around this person, and the previous relationship that I'd ended in 2020. And the responses to that were like not nice. At least one of them was especially not nice. And that really hurt. So I just felt like 2020 and the beginning of 2021 was just like stacking some hurts, right? Like one day I like went on Facebook and it was just like sponsored or promoted or whatever they say page, alt-right something or the other. And I was like, no, I can't believe this. Like, you have been mining my data for so many years and you would rather put this on my page than put something up that I just like talked about because you're listening to me. Because that person's money is more important than the things I'm actually interested in. That's what you've decided. And that's when I was like, you know what? Between the fact that like there had been like a glitch and it was too much. Like everything kept changing. I had been on this like really big local group and had been like trying to help them like mod stuff, and it used to be that you could add everybody at once to like events and stuff, and then it was only your friends. So I kept like adding people who I wasn't even close to those people. Like I just met them. Oh sure, I'll add you as a friend because then I can add you to all the group events. And then I was like seeing things that I wasn't even like not interested, but like I was getting floods of information from people. And I was like, if I took a break, if I just need a break from this constant flow of everyone's like good and bad, what would that look like? And it turns out it looks a lot like emptiness. It turns out if you're not on Facebook, most of your friends will not notice, or possibly they'll think that you blocked them. Like I'm still getting messages from people who are like, did you block me? Or someone said to me that they thought that you blocked them. And I'm like, no, I posted several times about how much I'm mad at Facebook. And also they were on my work page, and I've mentioned almost every month that no, I've not like blocked people. I have only left my personal page, but I left my messenger up so that anybody could message me at any time. And I really haven't heard from like 95% of those people. But it is a pandemic, and though my life is a lot emptier and quieter, I expect that for them it's kind of the same thing. And so it becomes this, it's the same thing that everybody's been talking about during the pandemic. It's like, are my friends just as traumatized by the pandemic as I am, or do they just not like me or whatever? So that's all been a thing. I'm extra appreciative to all the people who have reached out, and especially appreciative to the people who stuck by the work page, even though they didn't see my personal page anymore and thought that maybe that I deleted them, even though I said that I didn't and said that I wasn't going to. But again, Facebook doesn't show all of your friends' posts to you, so how would you know that your friend posted 5 times that she was leaving Facebook before she left Facebook? So it's been a year and a half. On the other hand, I've done a lot for someone who was sick. Before the positional vertigo, I was actually feeling better than I had in a really long time. And that sort of got me to the point where I was starting to get really comfortable listening to movies and television shows in a way that I used to be kind of depressed about for the first couple years. So I watched and listened mostly to a lot of stuff. So I'm pretty good if the camera is completely stable. So if it's on like a tripod or whatever, a stand of some sort. If someone is holding it, my eye is registering them breathing. So everything moves like this. And I hate it. And I'm sorry that I told you that, because some people have told me that once I say it to them, they can't unsee it. But I watched a lot of things, so many things. I caught up on a bunch of stuff. Part of it was just getting over the idea that I was so disabled that I couldn't watch television anymore. So for several months, I felt really okay even though it meant that I was basically doing nothing else. So as long as I do nothing and stay very, very still, until recently when I got this actual vertigo, I was doing okay. I really enjoyed a bunch of stuff, some of which are tied to the Hugos. But there were some other things that I saw, that I caught up on, that I heard about, that I was really into. Doom Patrol is amazing, just absolutely just amazing, and I cannot recommend it more. Oh God, it's so good. I loved it. Audio description is very hit or miss. I was incredibly happy that WandaVision was a show about old shows, because it meant that a lot of the early stuff that they did was with the old school camera work, and I really thought that was cool. God, it was such a cool show, just a great concept. And so I'm like mostly caught up on Marvel, except for anything that has to do with Spider-Man, because that's just way too much action, and also because it's not Marvel, so it's not, as far as I know, on. I guess maybe they did move over. I did see Shang-Chi, but I did not see Black Widow. It was just a timing issue. And also because I watched Kim's Convenience, because it seemed like it'd be less shaky cam. Not as much as you'd think. That was a really sweet show. I think I needed something sweet. There were like a couple things sweet that I really needed. And Ted Lasso, because yes, I have a lot of opinions about Ted Lasso, and if you have not watched both seasons, do not go read it. But if you have watched both seasons, then go read my opinion on Ted Lasso, because I haven't seen it anywhere else, and I don't understand why. It's on my blog, on my website. So speaking of that, now that I've been speaking for almost a half hour, I don't know how that's possible, but it is me. So yeah, never mind, I know how it's possible. I want to talk a little bit about the things that I've done in the past year. One thing that I did last year that kind of fell under the radar, I can't really remember, so I think it did. And then some of the stuff that I put out, and then I want to talk about the Hugos for just a little bit. Hopefully being able to put timestamps on things means that people don't have to listen to me talk about my personal life if they don't want to. Or they don't have to listen to me talk about books if they just want to hear about my personal life. Okay, so podcasts that I was on. Last year, right before the pandemic, Kev and I came, we were here at my house, and we recorded Artgasm with Allison Moon. And it did not come out until June. So like deep in the pandemic time. But I had forgotten to put it up on my website, which makes me think that I'd completely forgotten to tell people about it, because there were so many things going on at that time. So I updated my webpage with a link to it. The podcast again is called Artgasm. I just listened to it. It's probably like 20 times happier than I've been since then. Like, Kev and I, we're in such a good place. It's primarily about the work that we do and how we do it. But, like, we were in such a good place right before the pandemic. We had just gotten, the grant. We were really, like, heavily into the first draft of Supercell. And we thought we were going to get it finished in, like, just a couple of months. And then the pandemic came. And we didn't get done until, I want to say, like, September, although that was sort of calculated because we wanted to put it up for Pitch Wars, or Pitman. But yeah, Artgasm. So it's up on the site now, and it wasn't before. But this year I was on 3 podcasts, and somehow they all ended up being in October. I didn't really put out a lot of solicitations to do stuff, and Kev and I usually do some rounds, but we didn't this year because the things that we usually get grabbed for, we get grabbed for because of the conferences that we go to, and we didn't do that this year. So, or most of last year. So I actually got pulled in to do 3 things on my own, which is really neat because I usually don't get pulled in to do things on my own. They're like, oh, you do books with Kevin, right? Let's get you two on. But no, all me. So I did the Pikecast, which is a Christopher Pike podcast, which is my jam. We did Weekend, which is a book that like I thought I didn't have any real opinions on, and then it turned out I had a lot of opinions on them, on that whole book. It was fun. It was really fun, and I made a friend, which was nice. As told by Bex, who does book reviews, a lot of horror book reviews, but other stuff too. So that's cool. And then I was on Mary versus the Movies, which has been my other thing that's gotten me through the pandemic. My friends Mary and Dennis, who I recorded a Christmas song with last year called Christmas on Venus for their band Death Elf, DETHELF. They started a movie podcast of 80s movies that Mary had never seen before, that she just like missed in childhood. And so I begged to be on the Nightmare on Elm Street episode, and so when October came around, we did that. Turns out I have a lot of opinions on that too, and a lot of opinions about how the movie was not what I was expecting at all. It was very different from my memories, because I had seen it before. And so it was very different from my memories, so that was really interesting. And then the one that I recorded in October but didn't drop until this month was Preconceived. You've probably seen the post on that one because it's been going around a lot, actually, which I'm thrilled about. It is a Canadian podcast, and it's about the preconception, misconceptions that people have about things. And so I was the second polyamory guest. The first one was Dr. Eli Sheff. And so then I came on to talk as like the actual polyamorous person. Just some fun stuff if you want to listen to my voice even more than the like hour this is going to end up being. I don't. Why would you want to do that, you fool? So the thing that I actually do is write. So I write. I blogged a little bit this year, not as much as I probably, could have or should have, because a lot of what I'm doing is a lot of what I was writing, a lot of what I was thinking has been going into the books that I'll be publishing over the next couple of years. And so I'm sorry. Usually what I do is I feel like I need to give people access into my head because I'm a product, right? So this all comes up in the Artgasm podcast, talking about people as products, and I hate it. And I actually was glad that I listened to the Artgasm podcast, because I remember doing it, but I couldn't remember what we really talked about. And I'm really glad we got like deep into that and how messed up it is and how messed up it can get. I actually reference a polycule. I mean, we wouldn't have used the word then, but like a polycule from like the early 2000s that had a big breakup, and people wanted them to be more public about it, and they were like, it's our breakup, we can be as private about it as we want. And people were like, but you blog. And that was like you're a brand, right? Yeah. So I really hate this concept that like I should be online all the time and talking all the time, but also I have a Patreon and I ask people to give me money monthly to help me pay my bills so that I can put forth stuff into the world. So if you are on my Patreon, you got 1, maybe 2 short stories this year, and I was hoping to do more, but a huge part of it is that like I only have so many spoons, and so many of it went to the books, and a lot of the stuff that I don't have the energy to do is stuff that would be easily done by having an assistant that I can't afford to pay, right? It's stuff like the fact that Smashwords has like this, they're like, hey, if you put your stuff into Word, it'll be fine. If you write in Word, it'll be fine. No, it won't. I had my roommate go over my work and fix it in Word and put it in Word and look at all the, it still doesn't work. So we don't know why, and I'm sure somebody else a little bit more savvy than us could figure it out in like 5 minutes, but she's got a full-time job, and I'm tired, and I'm sick, and I need to go lay down all the time. Lie down? Oh, my 7th or 8th grade teacher, like, told us once about how to tell the difference between lay and lie. And he used Eric Clapton as an example, but I can never remember the example. I only remember that Eric Clapton was the example. Anywho, so in terms of what I actually put out this year, besides the Patreon story, which I think really was only one story, I had an artist who did the cover for the next story and then couldn't format it and just gave up. But we actually put out 2 audiobooks, one for Operator and one for Audition. The Supercell audiobook was supposed to be done sooner, but the person who does the audiobooks, who is my roommate, by the way, ended up having some family issues and then got this amazing new job. So I think there was a question about whether or not it would even be possible for her to record the book. So it's possible we might be looking for someone new at the beginning of next year, or she might be able to find the time to do it over her work's break. So either way, there will be some sort of announcement about that in January. So it'll either be, hey, the book's in review, or it's in editing, or whatever, or it'll be, we are looking for a new voice for hire. Which is fine, because I gotta tell you, she works her toes off, and she's wonderful, and she's the best, and I've been absolutely blessed to have her. And if we have to find someone else, good, because let her rest. Anyway, speaking of, Supercell came out in paperback and ebook, which is the 3rd for hire book. It is a prequel to Operator, but it does not need to be read first or afterwards. Either one is fine. It is YA friendly, which is to say there is a sex scene, but it's pretty much off. 2 sex scenes, but they're pretty much off the page. It is explicitly polyamorous. It's explicitly open, I guess, is a better way to say it. So I think it's really about, you know, the story of Sana and Marcella getting together, but and all the things about them in Operator that you know about if you've read Operator, but it's also about being a teenager and sort of having a bunch of feelings and not really knowing what to do about them, and then sort of picking that unusual way. There are so many polyamorous people who have that story about being open or polyamorous or in some sort of relationship like that, who didn't have the words for it. And I really hate how few YA books until recently have had a story like that, because it happens. Like, I was 17 the first time I was in an open-ish relationship. We didn't have a word for that. We didn't know. And yeah, like, I guess maybe somebody fed us a word for it, but I don't like who did, so I'm not gonna get too deep into that. Someone who's very well known in the community for being not great. But we were 17 and 18. And yeah, so Supercell is about becoming yourself, figuring yourself out. Who are your people? What do you want for yourself? choosing that path that's yours, whether it's about college or love or friendship. And I really like it. I think it's a good book. I think it's a good YA book, and you can get it basically anywhere online where books are sold. But if you want it in paperback, you either need to get it from me, Kev, or Amazon. If there were a better way to do that, we would. So Smashwords is the alternative ebook source to Amazon. So that's all the products that we put out. We are still working on the Cautionary Polyamory book, and that is going to be sent out to agents. So that process is going to take a while. And then we'll probably from there shift to the Fourth for Hire collection, which might take a little while because it's going to be a collaboration. It's going to at least have one, if not more than one, collaborators in it. So, okay. The Hugos. So I did the Hugos this year. Super fun. You pay money. There are like 2 tiers. It's either somebody who just votes, or you vote and you go to the actual award ceremony. So I just did voting because I can't go anywhere. And the reason that I did it is because you get a voting pack, and in that voting pack, they sometimes give you some stuff, they sometimes give you a lot of stuff. And this author that I like said, hey, I'm up for best series, you're going to get all of it. All of it. Every ebook and every story. And I said, oh, for $50? It was like 12 or 13 or 14 books and a bunch of stories. And that was just her stuff. And I was like, okay, sure. This is my $50. This is my present to myself for the whole year. Like, Merry Christmas, happy birthday. So I did that. And I got this huge bundle of things. Huge. It's just I could show you, but I don't want to show you all the numbers of voting that I did. Not that I understand why I would vote. It's voting's over, who cares? But yeah, it was a huge packet, just ginormous. There wasn't a category that didn't have most of the offerings presented to you. And it's novels, novellas, novelettes, short stories. You've got podcasts in there, and you've got even movies. This was the first year they did video games, which I can't do. But even the video game companies were sending out like a limited number of links, and you could ask them and you could get a code if you didn't already own the game. So it was a lot. It was a lot. And they send it to you in July, and voting is in November. And it's the hope that you are enough of a fan that you hopefully have already been through some of it. But given that my 2020 was spent reading Hellboy, no, I had not read almost any of it. Almost any of it. And so that was... So that was a lot of reading for me to do really quickly, especially considering one of the series had like 14 books in it. So I want to talk a little bit about like the process. A few years ago, there were some people who were very unhappy with how many women and people of color were nominated, and so they decided to flood the thing with their own votes by whoever they liked. And it changed the whole system. And so now things are very different, and I don't really know significantly how everything has changed, but there's ranked voting, and there's like no vote, which is different than leaving something blank. So it's pretty much eliminated the ability for people to come in and sort of troll their way to white supremacy, or whatever. whatever they were trying to do, to a sexism. And so since then, since they haven't been able to do that, a lot of the nominees have been women of color, people of color, queer folks, non-binary folks. You get to see a lot more of that. So that's been really cool. And so I'm all ready. Like, I was like all ready for this. I was all ready for this slate. And I had such a good time. Just a fantastic, like, I have to tell you, there was nothing in here that I hated. There was nothing in here that there was one thing in here that I just don't understand. But it did not win, and so I guess I'm okay. All right, so let's talk about it. I want to start with some of the things that I think are the problem with what happens when you have a bunch of nerds voting on something. For example, I'm going to talk a little bit about the best young adult book. I read a lot of YA. I was a youth services librarian, which means I took care of the programming and hanging out with every single parent and child and teen and everyone. And I read a lot of YA. There has been some arguments about the slate because one of the books on it, A Deadly Education, which, by the way, fantastic book. If you are one of those people who's looking to replace Harry Potter in your heart because you are older now and or you no longer want Harry Potter in your life, A Deadly Education is the book for you. It is not a YA book. It wasn't published as a YA book, and it wasn't marketed as a YA book, but because the main characters are teenagers, the assumption is that it can go into this slate, which, sure, you can do that. Sure. It did not win, but there is an issue with that. And the problem has a lot to do with perception of what is young adult as an industry. Young adult books are not, they're not just books about teenagers. If it was just, this is a book about a teenager, it could be anything, right? But that's not true. Although you see many books that are about teenagers in the YA section, many of them are generally shelved as adult and moved over to the teen section because they are like on a reading list or something, right? Like they'll be on a summer reading shelf, they'll be on a separate school shelf or something like that. Or they have been moved into YA because the kids take it out so much because it's on a reading list. There's a distinct line between what is YA and what is a book that just happens to have a teenager main character. And it has to do with the way that the teen is centered. For example, To Kill a Mockingbird is not a YA book. The narrator is blatantly an adult looking back on childhood. And yet I see it shelved in YA. I see it sold in like bookstores with YA books because teens read it a lot in school. I hope that makes that distinction very clear to you. Hopefully because you have to read it in school and you get exactly what I'm saying. A Deadly Education is a little bit more adult of a book. It's a little bit more murdery of a book, but also it's just a little bit more complex I had a heck of a time with the magic system, and I don't know if that was my 2020 pandemic brain, because I love the author, Naomi Novik. I love her. I love, she has this book called Spinning Silver. I love that. I think the other one's called, I want to say Uprooted. I loved that one. One of the problems is that if I move around a lot, I get a headache, and if I get a headache, I get brain fog. But, so, she doesn't write for teens. Just because her character might fit sort of into that, that age group or whatever, it's not, I mean, there's a reason that The Magicians is not a teen book. And it's not just because Quentin is going to college, it's because that's more adult content. Is it a great book? Yes. Should it be on this list? Probably not. What's the problem with putting it on this list? Well, for one thing, it says that if a woman writes a book with a teenager as the lead character, it is automatically a YA book, which is not always true. Right? One of the problems with Harry Potter books was they came out and they were put in like the middle grade juvenile section in the library. And then as the characters got older, the question was whether or not to split the series and put the books where Harry was older in the teen section. Is that a good choice because those books have older content? Or is it a bad choice because the kids who read the younger books are going to move on to those other books and expect to find them in the same place? A lot of adult authors who are women or have feminine names or feminine sounding names, feminine looking names, are automatically assumed to be YA authors, whether they are or not. And this happens over and over and over again. And it's one of the reasons why you see a lot of authors go straight for initials when they publish. It's the only way that people will shelve them correctly or promote them correctly. Because there are books out there that are explicit and about adults, and they will still get called YA and be put on best of YA lists and all this other stuff just because it's a woman writing it. So, although this one kind of meets the criteria, it's still kind of iffy, and you will see in the book world a couple of people talking about it. The book that actually won is A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking. The reason that I think that this part of the voting is a good example of what happens when you put a bunch of nerds together and ask them to vote on something. So the author of this book, T. Kingfisher, is also Ursula Vernon, is very well known in this community for writing books. Was it a fun book? Yes. Was it the best YA book in the group? I actually put it last. It was a super fun book. It reminded me a lot of like Pratchett. And I don't know that that necessarily means that it's a good YA. You know what I mean? The main character, one of the things that I actually thought of and wrote down when I was reading this book is that the main character lives separate from her, adoptive family, because she's considered to be an adult now. So that's that whole problem again. And so she's trudging every day from her job back and forth. So why is this in YA? And then at the end of the story, there's this little boy, I think. It's been a while. And he gets to live with her adoptive parents above their bakery where she used to be. So she's blatantly an adult. She's blatantly being treated as an adult. But this is a YA book that won the YA slate. This is the YA category winner. So that's a problem, right? Because I don't understand how this is a teenager book. Is it funny? Oh God, it's so funny. It also feels like a middle grade book with violence. Like, it's a middle grade book that also has a lot of violence in it, but also the main character feels like an adult. I wouldn't put this in young adult. It doesn't feel like anything. It doesn't feel categorizable that way, I guess, is what I want to say. And I'm not slamming the book itself. I had a fun time with it. But I would never give it a YA award. However, this author is super well known for the other books that she writes. I think she does like horror and other stuff. And she won. She won over a book that has been, 2 books that have been given award after award after award by all of YA, like book Twitter, Bookstagram, just, you know, all the publications. Librarians love them. But those 2 books didn't win. In fact, one of the ones the book that I thought was the best came in last. And the only thing I can tell you is it wasn't in the packet. I got it through NetGalley, which is it's a site that you could just log in and get it, but like most of the time they give you books before they come out. And I have to wonder, like, how much does the packet influence people? Because that book was stellar. That book was amazing. It was a debut book that didn't feel on any page like it was a debut book. It felt like the closest thing to an Octavia Butler book in YA. Like a modern Octavia Butler YA book is beautiful. And I'm not saying like, well then why didn't it win? Because it's fine if people didn't want to vote for it. But like to come in last and yet to be so much of what YA thrives on. Same thing with, one of the other books on there. Another one was a highly just raved about YA book. Nope. Absolutely not. Don't know why. Not sure. But hey, you see the author you see the author you like. If you're not a YA reader, I mean, I skipped categories. I skipped categories because I did not feel I could make a good decision because it wasn't something that I felt like I had any expertise in. But do I sound bitter? Because I'm like not trying to sound bitter. I have been talking for an hour, so I'm gonna sound flatter and flatter and probably more sarcastic than I'm actually being. But like, I don't know. Anyway, the winners for the winner for the Astounding. Yeah, I mean that's who I voted for, but like. It was a tough one for me because it's really tough because they have the Astounding Award, it's like your first year of eligibility and your second year of eligibility, and I'm like, but if you're in your second year of eligibility, maybe you deserve it more. It's like, do that. I couldn't help it. Also, it was just really good. So they do art, fan art, and then I guess professional. And it's really, really, like, for writing people, it's really hard to choose art. That one's pretty. I'll pick that. That one's not as pretty to me, I guess. Oh, God, so silly. The podcasts, or fan casts, they weren't all podcasts. Some of them were, I guess, YouTube channels. And so this is like where it gets interesting, because some of them, and I'll get to this in a second, but some things were like putting like YouTube channels up against podcasts. And I'm like, well, that's a little tough, because these are like two different mediums. What I kind of went for was, can I step into this as someone who's never listened to it before and enjoy it? That's where I am, basically. Can I, as someone who has never listened to this before, just jump in and actually enjoy it as somebody who's not really a podcast person? And there were only like 2 yeses. 2 strong yeses. There are things about talking about fandom that I love, right? There's analysis, which is, I just absolutely love it. And there's camaraderie and things like that. But there's also like a very fine line for camaraderie, because I have to tell you, like, most of the podcasts that I listen to are by people I already know. So I already have camaraderie with them. And when I say people I already know, I mean, I usually listen to myself to see if I want to be, miserable about one thing that I said the whole time, forever and ever. I do that. I absolutely do that. And then I listen to, Mary and Dennis. I listen to the Pikecast. I listen to, I do research on some of the podcasts I go on to. I try to listen to some of my friends, but I'm like not a podcast person in general. There's not really a good time for me to do it. Like I can't commute anywhere. I get car sick too easily. And so I can't put headphones on for too long, especially if they do channel. That makes me sick as well. So like for podcasts, I have to, and I don't want to annoy my roommate. So for podcasts, I'm looking for a certain level of like camaraderie that goes beyond the people who are talking, that are willing to bring in other people. I also am like really sick of people who are constantly talking in a way to promote themselves. I like when people talk about the things that they do versus promoting the things that they do. And again, that can be a very fine line. You can talk about the things that you're doing in a promotional way without sounding like you're selling me something. So what you're doing, no matter what, it's a promotion, right? If you're a writer, if you're an artist, if you're an actor, whatever, and you're on a TV show, every single person who goes on to late night talk show host guy, whatever, is trying to make you go see their new movie or watch their new television show or whatever. But there's a huge difference between, having to watch the clip after you've been laughing about an anecdote and listening to like 14 questions about that show. And I want the anecdotes. And then I will sit through the clip. Or by that point, I'll be interested about the clip. Tell me an anecdote about something that happened on the set, and I'll be more interested about what's going on there. Or tell me about the psychology of the character, or something. Don't just hype it up. Get me involved. And so that being said, World Building for Masochists was like the podcast for me, because every time those people talked about their works, they were talking about it in terms of world building. And so I never felt like I was being sold to anything. And that would, like, literally, they are talking about their work the whole time. And I never felt like I'm like sitting here going, oh, who was that guest again? Let me write down their name because that book sounds great. And it's not because they're telling me all the details of the book. It's because they're talking about how they built their world. And I'm like, somebody who has that much attention to detail probably writes a good book. And when you can talk to your guest without having your, bunches of other people that are on the podcast with you all the time and still balance everybody, that's a feat. It's really tough because like the Pipecast has 3 people plus a guest. It's really hard. Like, first off, I could not hear Becca the whole time. I had to look at the screen, but I had to look at the screen and wait for the thingy to move to see whether or not she had spoken because her mic was way down or something was going on there. And so it would be like, Becca would say something and I'd be like, could you repeat that please? I couldn't hear you. So I had to stop talking, wait to hear the thing again, and then answer. But then if we started talking all over each other, it was all done, right? Because nobody could hear anybody. It's really hard. And I just felt like it was so well balanced. It was super great. It was just really fun. And I love world building. It's one of my favorite topics. I just had a great time listening to it. Would I listen to it again? Depends on the guest. But again, like I said, I'm not a podcast person. There's not like a really good time for it to fit into my life. And it's just who I am. Like, I'm still behind on, Mary versus the movies and I would rather not be. So, but I can't, like I was listening to it while doing the dishes and realized like I wasn't hearing half of what Dennis was saying. So then I was like, oh, I'll do it while I clean. I can't clean right now because I can barely move. It's great. I skipped the editors because I don't really know what goes into that. And a lot of what it was, hey, here's my professional statement and a list of works that I've edited. And I'm like, I don't have time to read all your stuff. I'm sorry. And I was not going to vote for the person who I knew just by name. Like, I wouldn't do it. There was like only 2 people whose names I knew on there. Well, there was one person whose name I knew on there, and there was one person on there who, in their list of books that they edited, there was a book on there that I felt desperately needed another pass. And I was not going to skip everybody else's stuff to go 1-6. I just did not want to do that. So for the dramatic short and long form, television shows and then movies, holy moly. So this is where I had to take my time and just watch bits of things. Almost nothing came with closed captioning unless I sought it out on a streaming service, and nothing came with audio description unless it was already on that streaming service. So I had to wait until I was feeling well enough for most of this, or I had to not use the links that were provided and had to use the streaming services. So thank you to all the people who make sure in my life that I can watch things on their stuff. I appreciate you a lot. They had dramatic short form. They had a Doctor Who episode, which I was years behind, but fortunately it's Doctor Who, so you can kind of still jump in no matter what. They had The Expanse, which I have been told I can never watch, so I didn't even bother. She-Ra I had caught up in during I think 2020 when I was starting to feel better. I finally finished She-Ra, and so I knew that one. The Mandalorian, I had watched the first season of that with audio description with my roommate, so I watched the second season because there were 2 episodes that were nominated, and then the last episode of The Good Place, which was a show that I watched. It was the one show that I could watch as it aired because it does not shake anything almost ever. God bless them. Although the end there with the I forget what it's called, but it was very trippy. I had to cover my eyes a lot. But yeah, so The winner was The Good Place, and yeah, I mean, it was beautiful. It was perfect. I'll cry. I'm not gonna cry. It's fine. But it was really great just watching the new Doctor, which I haven't done because I'm still like somewhere in the middle of the last Doctor, because Doctor Who can get pretty shaky cam and runny and all sorts of stuff. I can't really pan, right? Like everything moves side to side. I can't really do that either. The Mandalorian's got a bunch of shaky cam and stuff in space, and I've had some other issues with like space and sky related vertigo as well. So I had to suck it up for that one, but I always joke that I'm never a Star Wars fan until I'm watching Star Wars, and then I'm like a mess. I'm like a hot mess. I'm like, no, Star Wars is fine. And then all of a sudden I'm like in the movie theater watching Rogue One, crying my eyes out. Did the same thing for The Mandalorian. Look, my eyes are already... Oh, jeez Louise. Anyway. And I knew I'd been spoiled. I made myself forget so I could cry all over again. Okay, dramatic long form. Oh my gosh. So what a category, like, is all over the place. This is where like one of the two things where it's like, how do you judge things that are so significantly different from each other? Because here were the movies: Birds of Prey, Eurovision Song Contest, The Story of Fire Saga, The Old Guard, Palm Springs, Soul, and Tenet. I can't do numbers. That was supposed to be 6, and it looks like it was 7. Whatever. Okay, so this is like, with the exception of Soul, this is like the spectrum of nerd, right? It's like Eurovision was like theater nerd. And like, I don't know, Old Guard was like, I'm gonna go with either you are a queer nerd or you are a independent comic nerd, or you're just like one of those like indie nerd people. And over here you've got like Palm Springs, which is a time loop romance comedy. And then you've got Birds of Prey, which is like the least Harley Quinn movie, and yet has the soul of Harley Quinn in it, but it doesn't feel like a Harley Quinn movie because it's too real. And then there's Tenet, which is just for boys. And I know that I sound like an asshole when I say that, and I don't care. Christopher Nolan movies are for Bond fans, or this type of Christopher Nolan movie is for Bond fans who are sci-fi nerds who want to be film nerds. Because that movie is atrocious until like the last 15 minutes. And then you're like, gee, I'd watch that all over again to see all the things that I missed if I didn't have to sit through a bunch of incredibly talented people acting wooden on purpose, saying like boring cliched things to get through the world's dullest spy movie. What the heck was Tenet? What was it? Now, I know I have to close my eyes through a lot of that movie. I know I do. But still, I love The Prestige. I like The Dark Knight. I even like the one with Bane, but only because I love No Man's Land and Talia. But I hate Batman Begins, and I hate this movie so much. Oh, but that wasn't the thing that I really hated. But also the last 15 minutes are great. I wasn't really sure what the war was about, but you know who's fantastic in it? Pats. Look, I don't doubt that the dude could act. I just wish that his teenage rebellion hadn't been not showering for 7 years. Okay, I'm moving on. Palm Springs was amazing. It's exactly what I want from a movie. Rom-com, time loop. That's it. That's all I want from a movie is a little bit of sci-fi and romance. That's all I want. Eurovision was so much better than I expected. Why? I mean, I couldn't really watch the song along because the camera spins all the time, but I had an idea. And Birds of Prey was fascinating. It's too real, and not everybody seemed to know if they were in the movie that was gritty or if they were in a Harley Quinn movie. And I have to say, so I did watch Suicide Squad, which I had to close my eyes through a lot of that and listen to the audio description too. But I know that it makes me sound, like I'm putting down Birds of Prey to say that I liked Suicide Squad's Harley Quinn better. I just really love over-the-top Harley Quinn. And this is a very grounded Harley Quinn, which is weird to watch after years of never seeing a grounded version of her. I did peek at the fight scene at the end, which is amazing, and I did make myself very ill. God, it's so good though. Soul was better than I thought it was going to be. I understand why some people had a problem with it, and I understand why some people did not. I'm sorry about the chair squeaking all the time. The Old Guard. So, you know how earlier I said that I'm having some issues telling the difference between something that might be good and something that I enjoyed? So I read the comic for The Old Guard, I don't know, a while ago. Before I knew it was a movie, I think. And the thing about it is, it's real close to the comic, really close. To the point where I was like, is this good or is this just the comic and I don't know any different? The graphic novels were all great. Some of them were greater than others. I can't get into Monstrous. I've tried. I just don't get it. And especially since this was volume 5, I was so far behind. I was going to try to read the whole thing, but I'd already read the first volume and it didn't appeal to me at all. So everything else I loved. I don't know what it is about Monstrous that I can't get into it. I think it's just too fantasy, the kind of fantasy that I have never gelled with. So related work is the one that's all over the place. So related work can be anything. It used to be a nonfiction category, and now it's just basically what the fuck ever, I guess, because we had everything from a new translation of Beowulf to a 2-hour talk about BronyCon, And yeah, so it was The Last BronyCon, A Fandom Autopsy by Jenny Nicholson on YouTube. It was a book called A Handful of Earth, A Handful of Sky, The World of Octavia Butler. George R.R. Martin Can Fuck Off Into the Sun, or the 2020 Hugo Awards Ceremony Rage Blog Edition, which was a blog post. Fiacon, which was a whole entire con, and Concealum Fringe, which was a secondary con, like a track to a con that was created at the last moment because they didn't feel that the con, I think, was inclusive enough. And yeah, and then the Beowulf new translation, which won, which I was a little upset about. And I feel like in this case, it was probably the people who were like, well, you know, this is about honoring the tradition of like what it used to be, which was that related work was about nonfiction works or whatever. And that this translation falls under that. Or maybe they just really liked it. I have no idea. But to me, I wasn't really sure. So I didn't read the translation itself. I read the introduction, which was enough to make me want to read the translation. I just didn't have the time to do it. And I didn't feel that was going to change my mind about anything in terms of voting. It wasn't the work, the text. It was what the work does within the context of science fiction and fantasy itself. Like, what does Beowulf do? Or what did Beowulf do? And therefore, what does this new translation do? And the answer was kind of like, Beowulf did a lot for Tolkien, but like, doesn't do a lot now with a new translation. And compared to talking about what George R.R. Martin did at the 2020 Hugos compared to creating an entire con around, or an entire con track around the gaps that are missing when we have conferences that are doing the same things over and over and over again every single year. I just did not think that held as much weight here within the science fiction and fantasy fandom, or within that community, or even within its scholarship. I don't think that it does as much as it does for the literary canon. And so while I'm super excited to enjoy it, and I loved the introduction. I mean, I really engaged with it. I was like, oh, I gotta read the Beowulf introduction. Oh my god, this is so good. I was like, oh, yeah, no, you're right. Like, and the whole thing is if you've heard anything about it, I'm gonna like run out of time just because I'm gonna talk about Beowulf so much. You should just read the introduction, okay? Just read the introduction. Because when it came out, people were like, she translated what is what, you know. But when she talks about why, I was like, can't even argue it. Anyway, I thought that the whole BronyCon thing was fascinating. I think the twist was hilarious. I did not super love some of the put downs in it, but I was not going to say anything. It's not my fandom. And honestly, so A Handful of Earth, A Handful of Sky is really interesting, but I think I would have loved it as an exhibit more than a book. I felt like I was missing that sort of, like I was looking at the pictures that are in there, and I was like, oh, I wish I were in a museum right now. And so I didn't really engage with the text as much as I was hoping to. I really, really wanted to be in the room with those things. But yeah, bringing the space into the bringing cons into spaces and spaces into cons, I think are going to be the most important and talked about things for the next couple of years. And Fiacon is doing that over and over again. And it just happened again that this is a discussion that the people involved are having, because because the Hugos were over the weekend and Worldcon, happened, and they're already discussing like affinity spaces because things happen on a macro level, but they're still happening on micro level no matter what, and those spaces are necessary. Okay, stories and series and I love short work. I don't read it nearly as much as I want to. I should. One year I'll get into them, but right now I have hundreds and hundreds of ARCs in my house, advanced copies of books that I haven't gotten to yet that I got from conferences over the years. I was really happy to be able to read books. The hiccups, sorry. To read some of the short works that I have not been able to over the past year. And it just tells me that there's so much power in a short work, which I already knew, but it's good to be reminded sometimes. There are these literary magazines putting these things out all the time, and they do not get enough attention from like mainstream anything, and I really hate that because like they're so good. And, if you're very lucky, your library will stock like the best of at the end of the year. But anyway, so for the short stories, there was a really cute one called Little Free Library, about a little free library that you should just read. I really liked that one. I really liked A Guide for Working Breeds. And I really liked Open House on Haunted Hill, which is kind of what it sounds like. I had a really good time with that. The person who won was the same person who won the Astounding Award. Who won the Lodestar, the YA award, I think. And I can't even remember what that story was, but I really should be able to, but I don't always have access to all my memories all the time. The title was Metal Like Blood in the Dark. I think I actually do remember which story it was, and it was very good. Will not scroll. Anyway, so I'm going to go with like horror is this person's just best genre, because that was a good one. Yeah, super good. Pretty sure that was it. Because I don't see anything else. That would have been it. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, no. The title threw me off for a second, but now that I'm like, wait, the rest of these aren't the story that I think, so it must be that one. Really good story, just really, really good. Intensely different from the other, from the YA story, just very, very different. The novelettes, so they just do it by word count, I think, and so the novelettes didn't really feel that significantly longer, but in some cases it did feel like you were getting a little bit more in depth. Sometimes it didn't. The winner was Two Truths and a Lie, which was really good. It actually, the beginning of it reminds me a little bit of Christopher Pike, and then it kind of goes off into its own place. But it's about an old school, like, I guess a horror kind of a kids TV person, like a TV host. I guess it's like a children's show, but it feels like a horror host. And so that was really interesting. The one that I was pulling for that one, and I was pulling for The Pill by Meg Ellison, which is a super intense story about weight and a pill that makes you lose weight in a pretty gruesome way. All the content warnings for that one, but it's definitely like a read once kind of a story. I don't know if I would read it again without a big break in between. She had a reading of it after it was right around the time that it was free to read online, and I tried, and I was like, no, I can't listen to somebody read this. I just read it. So yeah, that was cool. There was a story in there called Helicopter Story, which had started out life as a story called I Identify as a Attack Helicopter or something like that, and it had gone through a lot. because the person who had written it is a trans woman, and the bio did not say that, and so people were a little confused about what was going on with the story, because it is a person who identifies as an attack helicopter, who is an attack helicopter, basically. It's a really interesting story, but given the phrase itself and how loaded it is and how it gets used against people, people were like, hey, if you, to the publisher, they were like, if we don't know who wrote this, it's a little, like, we don't know who's using your platform. It makes us a little uncomfortable. And so, and some people it made a lot uncomfortable. And so they didn't know if the story itself was about identity, or if it was about, like, it just became this whole big thing. And so the story's name got changed, and there's an article that you can read that's an interview with the writer, who basically went back in the closet because of all the harassment of, basically you didn't say that you were a trans woman in your bio, and we didn't know how to feel about this story. Like, we didn't know if it was coming from a personal place, or if we didn't know if it was coming from a mocking place, because the story itself is so it's not satirical, but it is unusual. It's a very unusual story, and it really is, like, it really is one of those, like, threading the needle kind of a things, where you could read it and you could be like, okay, somebody just heard that phrase and they were inspired to write a story, or you can read it as someone who's really doing like a metaphorical deep dive into the concept of gender. And so, yeah, it became this, like, whole thing. And the story itself is actually really sad that people who are essentially traumatized from being attacked online all the time sort of turn that energy and to the publisher and said, like, who is this writer? Are you platforming somebody who's mocking us? And basically a woman went back into the closet as a result of that. It's really intense. I recommend this, both the story and the article, the interview with the author, because it's the kind of thing where we need to remember as people that the internet is a place where we both can feel trauma and both push our trauma outward very easily without seeing the other person's response and without knowing a lot about them. And while I do think that it's valid to wonder if you're being mocked and wondering who's platforming who, there's also a somewhere in between where you just don't read the story. But yeah, it's a sad story. It's a sad story about an interesting story, basically, is what I'm trying to say. The novellas were really interesting in that they were primarily queer or not white. And so this was like a really really diverse category. I really liked Finna, but for some reason I thought that it was going to be like, I don't know, I thought it was like Finna, like slang Finna, not Finna like a made-up IKEA. And it's a made-up IKEA. It's about two people who break up, who work at like a fake IKEA, which also like has pathways to like alternate universes. So I was a little confused at first, but I got it. It was really fun. And there are like badass librarians and magic and all sorts of things, and a lot of dealing with racism and magic, and yeah, just a very like diverse slate category in terms of like I never knew, is the slate the whole thing? I'm tired. And yeah, so just so many different things on there. Just a wide range from incredibly serious to incredibly like silly, but kind of heartbreaking. And it was hard. It was hard to choose. I think that was one of the ones where I switched around what I wanted a lot. And then finally the novel category. So there were, oh wait, no, that's not finally, because I skipped best series because best series. So the novel category had a lot. And it's somewhat connected to the best series because two of the books were from the best series. So let me jump to that first. So the best series were I'm gonna mispronounce that, but there's the Poppy War series, which is so much about like war, and so it's really tough. It was a really tough one to get through, and the Murderbot the Murderbot Diaries is in there, which was the thing I fell in love with, and I haven't shut up about it, so you probably have already heard me talk about it and possibly bought it as a result. The Lady Astronaut universe was in there, which was a little tough for me because of the whole space issues I've been having lately, but it's really wonderful. The Interdependency by John Scalzi, I really liked it. He is a very sort of, it's a fast, funny kind of a read. Even when he's like, you know, he can grab your heartstrings sometimes too, but he always does it with wit and kindness, which I like about him. And I want to say Daevabad, but I'm so bad at pronouncing things sometimes, and I should have looked it up first. Which was so good, just so good. I had never heard of it, I guess, or I hadn't heard of it in a way that like I knew what it was about. So I went into that one completely unaware, and I was having a good time because it had like some of my favorite things in it, like magic and which is weird. Like there are some things about magic that I don't want anywhere near my books, like inconsistent magic systems and elves and like a Lord of the Ringsy style thing, and like having a giant glossary like Wheel of Time and all this other stuff. Like those are the things that I'm kind of sick of and over. But if you give me, like these big just I don't know, I'm really tired at this point, sorry. Should have probably quit out and started again when I was a little bit more fresh. But I mean, fabulous dress and everything. I had a really good time with it. It did so many things that I was not expecting, and I really loved it. And then there was the October Day series, which is the reason that I spent $50 in the first place to vote. I had read the first one. I've read some of her other stuff, usually under her other names. And I knew that this one was her like magic and fairies and elves and stuff. And I knew that the first book was good. It was fine. Like it was sort of in that realm of like things that I wasn't really sure that I would really love, but I knew that I would enjoy it. I knew that she was really good at like knocking these books out because there were so many of them. And so I kind of think I set it in this idea that it was going to be like sort of, because it came out around the same time as like Dresden Files, and I'm like, oh, it'll be, you know, like a comfort read kind of a thing. And so I started it. I'm like, yeah, it's a comfort read, you know, it's kind of samey, but like, you know, you get to go along with the characters, and they change a little bit every book. And holy crap, with the holy shit. And she does something in the middle of those books that not only is a twist in terms of the overarching storyline, but she twists your expectation of the entire, I'm going to go with the genre. I don't want to say too much, but she basically is like, here's what you think you're getting. And yeah, I'll give you that. And then you will feel like a goddamn fool. So I felt like a fool. And I was happy about it. Like, I'm sitting here telling my roommate every single day that I finished another book, because I would finish the book, like, I was finishing them day after day after day after day. And so I was telling her every single day the plot of every single book. And I was stunned by the ways that this author not only was changing the characters as they grew, but also managing to get that sensation of, like, you know, making them feel consistent enough to feel like, you know, that comfort read feeling, while also devastating me as a reader and like pulling things over on me. And so I was like, I can't believe this. And like I said, I was reading her Twitter, and there are things about it that connect to her, not her life exactly, but the way that she processes things, that I feel like maybe it was too much for me to know. But it felt like I was getting a greater understanding of how she processes her own life and trauma through her writing. And to see that healing process was really amazing. And so I voted for it. But also because she said she would play DDR afterwards in a basically a gown if she won. But she did not win. And Murderbot did instead, which I love Murderbot, so that's fine. I just, it means that that series can't go, October Day can't go up for another 2 years. And by that point, they'll put in the book that came out this year, which was another big turning point for the character. So hopefully that'll do a thing, and bring more people to it. It is a series, though, that you have to basically read the whole thing to get what's going on. And so I'm not sure that everybody was willing to do that much reading. But if you read the first book, it really doesn't tell you what the series is like. It tells you what the first book is like, unfortunately. So it may not be a series that can ever win an award at this point, because it might just be too long and has too much going on. And though she is required by her publisher to sort of recap everything that's happened, it does not, the recaps will not show you what she has done with the craft. And the craft is really what impressed me enough to vote for it. So 2 of the books from the series were up for Best Novel, which is The Relentless Moon from the Lady Astronaut series, and Network Effect, which is one of the Murderbot books, which did win. And then also you have Piranesi and Harrow the Ninth, which is the sequel to Gideon the Ninth, and then The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin, who won 3 years in a row for a trilogy, and Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. So this was like amazing, like holy moly, there's so much talent going on here. Even, you know, for the one book in this group that I was just like, there's so much talent here. And I really I really just kind of, in terms of how I voted with my heart. Piranesi was the book that really just was my big turning point for 2020. It was the first book that I just read in like a sitting, and it is a beautiful fever dream of a novel. It is a mystery. It is batty. If you've read Beckett, you'll be okay. In that it's weird. I thought at first it was going to be like pretentious and bizarre and too much for me, but it's not. You just kind of have to go along with its flow. It's stunning, and also at the same time, it's very mysterious. And at the end, I felt really good about myself as a reader. I felt really good about where the story went. Yeah, so I just had such a good time with it and was so happy. I really wanted it to win, but I knew that it probably wouldn't. It was up against so many great books, and not only just the great books, it was just up against really popular books, within the like fandoms of like fantasy, and well, mostly it was up against a murder bot book, and it was up against a lady astronaut book, and a very popular person in like the whole science fiction fantasy community, but also up against Jemison, who had 3 wins behind her, and up against Harrow the Ninth, when Gideon the Ninth was like so beloved by like every single person in the whole wide world, except me. And I have reasons, but I can't make them work with anybody else's reasons, because we just are talking on 2 totally different levels, and it'll never get there. I can't even have that conversation with people anymore. It just doesn't go anywhere. I've tried to understand them. They've tried to understand me, and we do and we don't, and it just doesn't matter. May as well be in Piranesi. And then Black Sun, which is just absolutely like engrossing, just so engrossing, and like anybody could have won. Literally anyone could have won, and I wouldn't have been surprised. It was just like that. It was just like that. The Relentless Moon shifts characters in terms of who's the narrator, like for the series, and so it goes into like this whole different, like you're taking everything from a different perspective, and that's really interesting, and you're like, whoa, it's like a whole different perspective, but also like you're way more on the, instead of from the astronaut going into space for the first time and like breaking down barriers, you're more on the ground and trying to, well, not really, but you're trying to like you're seeing more of like the perspective of people who are really doing the it is really like who's on the ground, sort of, and how people are responding to all of it, and and so that's like really interesting. And you've got The City We Became, which is just this sort of like epic concept of the city is becoming an entity unto itself. And so because it is so big, and New York City, because sorry, I'm from New Jersey, it's the city, because New York City is so vibrant and so distinct in its boroughs. Each borough has a person that is representing it, and so they all have to come together and help this process. Like, it's so cool. Like, it's such a cool idea. And then Harrow the Ninth is like so trippy and weird, and also takes the first book and like completely flips it on its head. So there's so much going on there. There's so many ways it could have gone, and so everybody was like, Murderbot. Like, okay, Murderbot. I can't say enough about how wonderful Murderbot is. I really can't. I like to joke that Murderbot is the voice of a generation, and that generation is a bunch of people who just want to sit home and watch TV. But I just read a thing on, I guess, Twitter, where someone was like, hey, I just helped somebody set up their Libby account, which is a library, digital library account. And I just helped this like 86-year-old woman set up her account, and the first thing she wanted to do was look up Murderbot. So, kinship. And I was like, yeah, no, fair, but also, like, would my grandmother have loved Murderbot? I don't know. Like, yes, but only maybe if it were a Murderbot TV show. But maybe she would have loved Murderbot. I have no idea. But I love Murderbot, and I like tell my I read lines out to my roommate, so she likes Murderbot. My kid, I was reading the lines, and my kid just like popped around the corner when he was still living here, and he was like, I love this. I love this thing. I love this thing called Murderbot. Murderbot, my beloved. And yeah, so like Murderbot is freaking fantastic. Okay, I'm seriously out of iPad, but thank you for listening, and please leave comments and feedback and love and attention. I'm a Libra. I need it, despite being, kind of a hermit. Thanks so much for sticking with me, and if you need the books, purchase them. If you need them signed, let me know and we'll do our best. It's tough when it's not the crowdfund, but we do try. Thanks.